Good morning, everyone. So I am Rebecca Christensen, and I am joined today by my partner, Stacy Bergman, here at
Good,
Evergreen.
good
Um,
morning.
yeah, and so we are thrilled to have you all with us. I'm going to go over a little bit of housekeeping first, and that is this session is being recorded. So if for some reason you need to jump out early, we will be providing links to the recorded session on YouTube that you can watch later. We'll also be sending out those slides. You're all muted and won't be able to chat, but there is a Q&A link down at the bottom of your Zoom window. So if you have any questions during the session, please go ahead and type it into that Q&A, and Stacy will interrupt me and get your questions in there so that we can make sure that we tailor this event to you all to be as effective as possible and help you out. So today we are going to be going over Charity Navigator. Hopefully you've all heard of this organization. We're going to do a quick overview of who they are and why we care who they are and why this is important. We're going to cover their rating methodology so that you all have a good understanding of how they come up with these scores. And then we'll use that information to figure out how you guys, if you're related to a nonprofit, can maximize those scores, or if you're an advisor to a nonprofit, where you can give tips for them to make sure that those scores reflect the overall health of the organization. And then we're going to allow you to apply that to actually look internally and use those scores as a measuring stick for how the organization's health is overall. So a little bit about Charity Navigator. They've been around for about 20 years. They have or almost 25 years now, and they are themselves a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And their mission is to provide information and clarity and a measuring stick for nonprofits so that donors can get a good idea that the organization that they're supporting is actually worth supporting and is effective in the way that it applies its mission. So they started with only about 1,000 charities back in 2022, or sorry, 2002, and they was only like the top 1,000 charities in the country. And over the last 25 years, they've expanded that, and they now are reviewing over 225,000 charities. And they have a giving basket tool through their portal, and they've raised over $300 million for those charities through that. So this is a well-established organization, and it is used by a lot of different people in the industry to determine what the best charities are to give to. And we all want to make sure that we're getting the most bang for our buck when we give to a charity and that we're having the biggest impact. And so this organization, this portal is used by obviously individuals who don't know if they're looking for, oh, there was a natural disaster. What's the best charity for me to give to support people in that situation? Or there's a war, or I'm worried about the homeless situation in my environment, or whatever it may be. They can look at Charity Navigator and they can filter by type of charity, they can filter by impact, they can filter by the highest rated. And so you've got individuals, you've got foundations who are making grants, who may or may not be very sophisticated in their grant giving. They can rely on Charity Navigator to know that they've already done a huge screening process and rate charities that way. Institutional DAFs who also are making contributions on behalf of their donors are use this for ranking and making advice to their high net worth philanthropists. The media and the press reports, and Charity Navigator has introduced a new feature where they will actually include highlights on your portal if your organization's mentioned in the news, positive or negative, but it will highlight that for donors so that they can see if there's specific items in the news that are reflecting you. Obviously, nonprofit professionals can use it to look up 990s to see what organizations are out there. And when we as professionals are advising other organizations on grant giving, we can refer them to the rankings in Charity Navigator. And some of the changes that have happened as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill, there's different incentives for organizations, particularly corporations who are giving, to either maximize or stop giving altogether. And so Charity Navigator is used a lot by a lot of those organizations to determine what organizations are worth giving to, depending on what kind of tax benefits they're going to receive. So I already mentioned all those different donors look at this, but what are some of the issues that we're facing today? Well, there's a lot less trust. There are a number of articles and news reports out there of organizations where there's been fraud or there's been theft. And so it is concerning for donors to think that they may be giving to an organization and those funds are just funneling into someone's pocket. There are fewer donors. Less than 50% of US households donate. And so it's a smaller pool of resources that are trying to be shared by more and more nonprofits. And so any kind of leg up, any kind of way to make your organization stand out is going to be really important. So who is rated by Charity Navigator? This is going to be only 501c3 organizations. So there are other flavors of nonprofit. There are C4s, C6s, C7s, 19s, all kinds of things. None of those are included. Only C3s are included. The goal of Charity Navigator is to create some kind of a standard objective rating. So that's why they focus on 501c3s. Plus, those tend to be the deductible contributions that people are looking for. They must be US based organizations. So there may be organizations that are friends of organizations. So there's C3 organizations that funnel money to a foreign organization or a foreign cause, but those only the friends of the C3 that are US based are going to be rated. And then this is an important point. They only rate organizations that file the full Form 990. So if you are an organization that receives less than $200,000 of revenue, you are not required to file that full Form 990. You can file either the 990EZ or the 990N. But if you are interested in getting a ranking from Charity Navigator and having more information available to the public, you can still opt to file that Form 990. And so just because you're below those thresholds does not mean you can't be rated. However, you must have filed at least 3 years of that full Form 990 for them to rate you. So there will be no ranking. You may show up on their portal, but they will have no rating for you. So also, if you're a private foundation, while you are a C3, you're not going to fall under this because you're not filing that Form 990. So do be aware, if you want to be rated by Charity Navigator, then that might be a reason to opt to file that Form 990 in a year, even if your revenue is below those thresholds. So where do they get their data? So one of the major places they get their data is from the IRS directly. And that is directly from the IRS tax exempt, the business master file. That does get updated after you file your 990, but it is not super quick. So if you're filing right on the May 15th deadline, you likely will not have that data updated for at least 2 cycles from when they pull that data from the business master file, because it doesn't get updated immediately. So if you're looking at it and trying to get your scores updated, filing your 990 earlier is going to be better because it takes a little while for the IRS to push that data through. They also get a lot of the information for the other areas that are not finance related directly from the organizations themselves. So if this is an area that's important to you and you're interested in making sure you maximize your score with Charity Navigator, I recommend you go ahead and get set up with the portal. And it's pretty easy. You log into their portal and you identify with the nonprofit, and then you can log in and you can make changes. So there are several, and we're going to go into detail, but there are several different questionnaires that you can complete. And depending on your responses, you can affect your score pretty dramatically. And in order to qualify for a number of their lists or their recommendations on their website, you would need to have all of the areas completed or have more areas completed than just the financial. And they also pull information from a couple of other partners. So some of you may have heard of Candid or GuideStar. They're not the same thing. Candid does have a culture questionnaire. And if you complete it on Candid's website, they will actually share that with Charity Navigator and the Impact Genome Registry as well. So they do share with other nonprofits. So whether you do any questionnaires or portals or not, if you do file the Form 990, you likely have a rating on Charity Navigator. But if you want to have a little more control over that, you can also add in the other areas and participate in the portal. So I mentioned getting your 990 filed in time for updates. So the ratings are updated roughly every 2 months. Around the holiday season, they do it monthly because they know people are trying to get their year-end giving, and they want to make sure that if you're trying to update things, that it's reflected as soon as possible. So if you file your 990, it'll take a couple of months for it to show up. If you complete a questionnaire, it'll take a couple of months for it to show up, but there's a couple of months, every couple of months it can get updated. So if you have changes, if you have more information, you can put that in there and it'll only be delayed by a few months. And those deadlines, I have the 2026 deadlines I'll show you at the end, but those deadlines to get your information in is usually a couple of weeks before the update. So you'll want to be aware of those deadlines and get things filed, or you're going to have to wait an extra 2 months to have it show up. They do change their methodology pretty regularly. They did a huge revamp about 5 or 6 years ago, but now they're doing smaller updates, and they look at metrics and see, are they unfairly penalizing a specific segment of the industry or a particular type or size of nonprofit, and they'll modify those. So they announce those usually in February, and then they'll take effect in spring. So we should be seeing all of the 2026 updates hitting in April. Actually, I think today is the current update is April 7th. So we should be seeing any of those updates hitting this month. So going into the rating system. The rating system is, they call it the Encompass rating system, and they have 4 areas they call beacons. Those 4 areas are accountability and finance, leadership and adaptability, impact and measurement, and culture and community. So we're going to start with the accountability and finance beacon, and I'm going to spend most of the time with this because this is the information that is going to pull directly from your 990, and this is an area that you have immediate ability to impact by making sure that your 990 is correct and knowing what areas of the 990 to focus on. And it is something that is very applicable to determining maybe some operational decisions inside your organization that you can use to maximize these scores. So there's the accountability piece and the finance piece. So the accountability piece has up to 18 different metrics. Not all of them will apply to all organizations, and which ones Charity Navigator looks at will depend on the size and the funding structure of your organization. So again, most of this information is answers that are specifically on the 990, and I'll just show you where those items are. But if you are an organization that has over $50 million of revenue, then they also look directly at your website. And if you are an organization that has a significant part of your revenue from program service revenue as opposed to contributions or grants, there are some metrics that will not apply to you. So depending on those 2 features, whether you are more or less donor funded or program funded, and where your revenue is overall, you may have some metrics that don't apply to you. The finance beacon is only 4 metrics, and there are 2 of those metrics that apply to everyone, and then there's 2 that only apply if you are over that 2 million and donor funded rule. So the 2 that apply to everyone are your program expense ratio. And so this is going to be total programmatic expenses. So hopefully you're all aware of the functional expense categories. You've got programs, you've got management general, and you've got fundraising. So we're looking now just at that program spend, and then you divide that by your total expenses, and that's going to be your program expense ratio. And then total liabilities to total assets is pretty straightforward. If you exceed that $2 million revenue threshold and you receive more than 40% of your revenue from donors as opposed to program service revenue, they will also look at your working capital ratio. And I put there, they recommend 6 months, which I am aware that that is a reach for a lot of organizations, particularly smaller organizations. And they do that. The highest score you're going to get is going to be that 6-month amount, but that's going to be your working capital, which will generally be your current, your liquid assets divided by your average monthly expenses. And they get that by looking at your total expenses for the year and just dividing that by 12. And then your fundraising efficiency. Again, if you have 0 fundraising expenses, they won't include that. But generally speaking, we would expect to see any organization that has donor revenue, any contributions or grants, to have some degree of fundraising expenses. And so they're going to look at your total fundraising expenses divided by your total contributions. And I mentioned previously that if there are certain metrics that are not making sense or penalizing a specific area, specific segment of the industry, they will reevaluate and pull those out sometimes. So these are changing on a regular basis. So let's look a little bit more into those different kinds of which of those metrics they're applying. So again, if you're a large organization over $50 million and you have more than 40% of your support from contributions, then they're going to be basically every single metrics that they have available to you is going to be applied. Then there's the in-between area. If you're over that $2 million threshold, but under that $50 million threshold, you're still going to have a lot of those metrics, but there's a number. They won't be looking at your website, and there's some other items that they won't be reviewing. And I have a little more detail in future slides. Again, the smaller you get, if you're under that 2 million, then they're not going to be, they don't care about the donor support segment. So they're going to have some smaller finance and accountability metrics, and it continues down from there. So looking in a little more detail on some of those accountability metrics. So these 4 are specific questions, yes or no questions that you have on your 990. And one of them is your board composition. So in order to get maximum score for board composition, they want to see at least 3 board members. That's the top one. And then at least 50% of that board is independent. Now, independent means that those board members do not get compensated over a certain threshold, that they don't have any business transactions with the organization, and that they don't have any family members who are employed or have business transactions with the organization. So these are going to be fully arm's length board members who are not receiving any kind of compensation or a business relationship with the nonprofit or with any of their family members. If you're a large donor funded, so that's going to be the 2 million to 50 million organizations, they actually want to see 5 board members and have at least 50% be independent. Generally speaking, this is just best practice, and this is what we do advise most of our clients. We would say 3 board members is kind of the minimum so that you can have a separate president, treasurer, and secretary, and to have at least 2 of those 3 or 3 of the 5 be independent is definitely a good structure for the organization. If you are over $2 million of revenue, they're also going to be looking for an audit and an oversight committee. Now, Charity Navigator looks at organizations all across the country. We do tend to have a lot of our clients are in California, and they're subject to the Nonprofit Integrity Act, which automatically requires this. If you have $2 million of revenue, you are required to get a financial statement audit in the state of California, and that audit must be overseen by an audit committee. Now, interestingly, again, because they are looking at organizations across the country, they also look for an audit if you have over $1 million of revenue, even if you're not in California. So you may not get full points if you're a California organization under that 2 million, but over that 1 million. And we don't necessarily recommend that you spend the money to get an audit because that's a pretty significant outlay of resources. A review is kind of where the sweet spot is between those two. So this is one of those scenarios where there may be a downside for Charity Navigator of not making this operational choice, but it might be the right operational choice for your organization because your responsibility is to use those resources in the most effective way for the organization. And it may not make sense for your organization to have an audit just to get a few points on Charity Navigator. Below $1 million, but above 500,000, they will be looking for a review or a compilation. Again, that doesn't mean you absolutely need to get one. This is not a huge chunk of your score. So again, I would consider if it was something you were already thinking about doing, this could be a minor item in that pro column, but do not choose to spend the tens of thousands of dollars that you might need to spend on a review or an audit just to get a few points on Charity Navigator. Another question is material diversion of assets. So that's a question on the 990 itself. Was there a material diversion of assets? Material is different for each organization. It's based on a percentage of the net assets of the organization. You are legally required to disclose those if they happen. So obviously we want to have in place internal controls that prevent these types of things from happening just as a best practice. But if you do need to disclose it, do know that it's going to ding your organization for at least 3 years because the Charity Navigator looks at the 3 years prior to the most recent filing.
Hey, Rebecca, quick question came in on that one. Can you define a material diversion of assets?
I believe it's 5% of net assets. I will clarify that. I have to remember the exact amount, but I believe it's 5% of net assets. All right, so then there's a bunch more. These are all disclosure items that are going to be disclosed on your 990 as well. And so some easy ones are, is your website listed? So on page 1 of the 990, there's a line for your website. Yes or no. If that's listed, you get points. Do you have a number of policies present? Conflict of interest, whistleblower, document retention and destruction? Yes or no. These are really easy, low-hanging fruit for if you do not currently have these policies. Really quick, get those implemented before the end of the year, and you can now answer that yes on your 990, and it will start to give you a few more points on your Charity Navigator score. Does your board keep minutes? Most of these items are just generally best practices. So if you don't have these things in place, it's something that you should consider doing. Board minutes are a really important way to show that you have transparency and you have good governance. Is your 990 disclosed on the website? Again, an easy way, if you have a website, just every year you file it, you just upload that to the website. You can answer the question on your 990 that it's available via your website. You satisfy the statutory requirement because you are legally required to make your 990 available to the public, and you get a few points on Charity Navigator. The rest of these items are going to only apply to certain organizations over revenue thresholds. So starting with loans to or from related parties, yes or no. If you do have those, there is going to be a slight decrease in your score. Was the 990 provided to the board before filing? Our firm takes the position that that should always be answered yes. If your board, you should have full transparency and visibility into the 990 before it is filed. Their names are on it. They should see it. They should understand what's on it. And then the next few items over here on the right, all of those are only going to apply to very large organizations that have over $50 million of revenue. So I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on those, but those are things that you can affect your score if you're one of those larger organizations. Now, looking at the finance metrics, I mentioned those 4 items. So the top 2, these are just how those points are calculated. So I mentioned program expense ratio is your total, your average program expense divided by your total average total expense. I think that actually should be total program expense divided by average total expense. But if you are over 70%, you've got full points. 75% is thrown around as kind of an industry standard, but Charity Navigator has taken the position that 70% is optimal. Anything above that is you don't get any extra points for. And then anywhere from 50 to 70%, they give you partial points linearly on that. Liability to asset ratio, they're looking for at least 30% to get maximum score. And then again, linear assignment of points from 30% to 70%, and I see a typo right there. That should be anything less than 70%. Oh, sorry, no, that's correct. Sorry. Anything greater than 70% of your liabilities to assets would be 0 points. And then if you are over the $2 million revenue threshold, then your fundraising efficiency, they're looking for essentially 20 cents on the dollar. So every dollar you receive shouldn't cost you more than 20 cents to get. You'll get full score for that. And then again, a linear allocation from 20 to 50 cents. And working capital, they're looking for, again, 6 months or greater. You're going to get full score. Anywhere from 1 to 6 months, you'll get some points and then no points if you have less than a month of working capital. All right, so we're going to move into the leadership and adaptability beacon. And so this one is basically entirely driven by the questionnaires on the portal. So they're super easy. These ones take 5 to 10 minutes to answer, and they're looking for information on the organization's mission, vision, and goals, your leadership investments, and your adaptability and learning, particularly at your leadership level. And those are the various points that you can receive out of that 100 for that particular beacon. So I mentioned 10 to 15 minutes, you do it through the nonprofit portal. So once you've gotten set up and are linked to your organization, you can answer these questionnaires. And so the survey is going to ask you specific questions about the strategic goals for your organization. And these are almost the wording themselves on the questionnaire. And then they give you options. So they're pre-populated options for you to answer. You do put in your mission, the actual wording that you want for your mission. But other than that, the survey is going to be asking you specifically, did you do these goals? What goals did you have? And how did you achieve these goals? Leadership development, similar. They're going to have very specific options to choose from about what kinds of initiatives that you put in place. Did you provide training? Did you provide guidance and coaching? Those kinds of things. And then external mobilization, is going to be how you engage externally. So how do you engage donors? How do you engage volunteers? How do you engage your client base, whatever that may be, to advance your mission, and any challenges that you may have encountered to that. And then what other things are you doing to ensure that your organization is adaptable and can meet challenges? And again, they're all pre-populated questions. So basically they're just check boxes. It's super easy to do. If your executive director or board chair has 10 or 15 minutes, they can log on there and do this, and you've got a whole other beacon completed really quickly. The next beacon is the community and culture, or culture and community beacon. And so this section is all about evaluating your culture and your commitment to fostering relationships both within the organization and with the communities it serves. And again, this is going to be 2 different surveys that you're going to complete. The first one is the How We Listen survey, and the other is the Equity Strategy survey. And just by completing How We Listen, regardless of how you answer it, you'll receive full scores for the How We Listen survey. The equity strategy will depend on how many different questions you answer, and it's going to be based on the answers that you gave. So equity strategies has 14 questions, and they're going to ask questions about your board and staff diversity, your inclusive leadership, what kind of equity programs you have in place, and they're going to have questions about how you analyze data related to your staff diversity and composition, and your board composition, and your beneficiary demographics. And so again, these are just going to be pre-populated check boxes. You just answer them, check the boxes for whichever apply to your organization, and however many you checked will increase your score. Like as I said, the How We Listen survey is just questions like, do you collect feedback from your constituency? How do you collect that feedback? And what are you doing with that feedback once you've collected it? And what challenges have you faced or are you facing in getting and using that feedback? And again, pre-populated questions, you just answer the ones you did. So both leadership and culture and community are really easy ways to get a few extra, complete a couple of beacons and get a few extra points towards your score. The last beacon is the impact and measurements beacon. And so this one is about measuring your impact and measuring it. So it's about figuring out what you do to collect information and how you then apply that information, as well as are you being very efficient in achieving your mission. So measuring is about how you collect and use your data, and that anyone can complete. It doesn't matter what area of the industry you're in. And impact is going to be, are you achieving your mission and are you doing it efficiently? This area, they just rolled out this impact builder report. So it's in pilot right now. And so if your organization is in certain categories, you can go in and complete this questionnaire. If you do these 2 sections, then the impact score is much higher. It's really it's a beefy questionnaire. This one takes 1 to 2 hours to complete, and it will give you roughly 70% of the score, and then the measurement is only 25%. If you don't complete the impact, then you'll get the score for the measurement, but you'd obviously get a better score if you had completed the impact score. And your profile, excuse me, your profile page will show you how you scored on each of those sections. Charity Navigator also, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Question came in. For organizations that don't easily or organically fall into one of those categories, how do you recommend they work with that?
I would recommend that you start by getting a relationship with Charity Navigator and letting them know that you're interested in being able to report on your impact. And I'll show you what those categories are in just a minute. They're very broad categories, but I think, as I mentioned, they're always trying to figure out, they don't want to penalize any organizations that don't have a specific, that don't fall into a certain metric. So at a minimum, if you aren't able to do the impact, if you do the measurement feature, that counts toward completing this beacon. So even if you can't do the impact, still do the measurement, and that will have, if you do the other 3, or really the other 2, you don't really have a choice on accountability. If you do leadership and you do culture, you've now completed all 4 beacons, and you've essentially satisfied that, having done all 4 beacons. Whatever's available to you, take advantage of that, but definitely Charity Navigator has a great support team that if you contact them and say, hey, I wanted some guidance on how to do this, this doesn't seem to apply to us, we'd be interested, they are taking that feedback and they do use that to help design future changes to their rating metrics. So measurement. So this is going to be 5 areas. They're going to ask you about your program planning and design and what kinds of evaluation tools you use to set those goals, and then what you do to take into account your stakeholders for your program development, what objectives and activities you have. And then again, they're big on data collection and analysis. The idea is, are you constantly trying to get better by using the information available to you? What best practices do you use in collecting and analyzing that data? And how do you then disseminate that data to the stakeholders and the decision makers and the action team that you have? And how do you then use those results to continually improve your programs? Again, it's a quick questionnaire. There's not a ton there. This is a lot of information with very short questions. So it's a pretty easy questionnaire. The impact is, I mentioned, that report builder. So it's in pilot program, as I mentioned. So they're rolling this out and seeing how it applies. And once you've completed it, you actually get a report that's kind of like an annual report, but it's an impact report. And so using the information that you've completed, this is much more of a give and take process with them. They use True Impact, which is another organization, to actually run this program. And so they will actually give you an impact report that you can disseminate to your donors or your constituency. So it might be worth the effort to go through and do that report builder so that you then have this tool that you can use in your marketing as well. They will allow you to update it once every 6 months too. So as things change in your programs, as your impact changes, you can complete the report again and update your score for that. So these are the areas that they have specifically. When you go in to complete the impact report, it will ask you which of these areas you fall under. And so if you don't really fit into one of these categories, then it's probably not going to work right for you. And that would be when you would want to reach out to them and say, hey, this is what the area that we're in. We would love to have the opportunity to do impact report for our industry as well. And so impact, so each of the different, so that's all of the impact, all the different beacons, excuse me. And so this is kind of how they all weigh in. So, oh, I don't know why this is over here. Accountability and finance is this guy here. So it's 31.5% of your total score. So that's all coming from your 990. So almost a third of your score is based on answers that are on your 990. And then that impact assessment, if it's completed, will be almost 40%, 39% of your total score. And then you can see culture, community, leadership, adaptability, and measuring outcomes are a smaller amount. So if you have the ability to do the impact assessment, please do. If you don't, it will not lower your score. It just won't give you that additional oomph into your presentation and your overall reporting on your, so that the overall ranking, which we'll look at right now. So here are the rankings. So once each of those beacons is out of 100, and then those average to give you your score out of 100. So if you get 90 or above, you're going to be a 4-star organization. And you actually get a 4-star, Charity Navigator 4-star badge that you can put on your social media and you can put on your website. And it's definitely something that is worth, if you have it, you should definitely advertise it, because it shows that you have a third party who has validated that your organization is strong and transparent and well governed. If you're between 75 and 89, then you're going to be a 3-star, and you still do get the 3-star badge. And then below that, you're going to be needs improvement, poor, or obviously below 50, be very poor. Now, most likely, if you are an organization that is getting very poor, it's because all they have is your 990, and you have a lot of no's on that 990 that show that you're not doing things that you probably should be. So their goal is really, they think that there's a baseline of well-run organizations, and they're really looking for outliers, people who are really not doing what they should be or are really outstanding. So most organizations should be falling in this 3 or 4-star category. So if you're right on the cusp, you're a 3-star and you're at 88, 89, it's really worthwhile to take a look and see if there's little tweaks, little things that you can look at and see, can we adjust this? Can we put in place this policy? Will it affect our score? And here's that 4-star badge here. And so other reasons besides just maximizing your score to consider trying to complete all of the beacons is they actually get prioritized in Charity Navigator's search algorithm. So if someone's looking for an organization to give to for disaster relief or a specific cause, you will come up higher on their search results if you have completed all 4 beacons. Additionally, they do allow donors to search by organizations that have completed all 4 beacons. So if anyone's familiar with Charity Navigator's methodology and they say, I want to look at an organization that has clearly invested in this, you would be only come up if you had completed all 4. And again, with the impacted measurement, you only have to complete the measurement to be treated as having completed that beacon. Their statistics show that they get more donations, particularly through their charity basket, if they have completed all 4. And there are certain lists that they occasionally post, like the Where to Give Now will be like a hot button issue. Like if there was an earthquake in Haiti, they would be highlighting Haiti support organizations, or California fires, we would do California fire support organizations. And they also have a best charities list. So in order to qualify for any of those things, you want to have completed all 4 of the beacons. So these are some ways to use this information to maximize your score. And so the top 5, and I'm going to kind of go through these. I think number 1, it's there because it's the most important, is your 990 needs to be correct, and you want to make sure you have in place all of the best practices that best policy. That's kind of 1 and 2. So if you file a 990 and you realize that there is a mistake, you are able to file an amended return. We generally try to avoid filing amended returns because they're both public documents. The 990 as a whole is a public document, both the original filed and the amended. They'll both be available on the IRS website. They'll both be available to the public, and it can create confusion. So the best step is to make sure you review that 990 carefully before it is filed, particularly, and I'm going to go through the certain sections you want to look at, but particularly all of those areas where we're asking about those policies, where we're asking about your board of directors, where we're asking about your minutes and whether you have diversion of assets, any of those things, you want to make sure those are correct. If you do find an error, one that's glaring enough to be necessary that you want to amend, there is a button on the portal that says file an amended return. And so you would first need to file it with the IRS. Then you would go into the portal and you would file the amended return, and you will need what's called your submission ID. Now that all 990s are filed online, when the return is filed, your tax preparer should receive what's called a submission ID. It's a long string of characters, and you'll have to enter that, upload your amended 990 and that submission ID to prove that it was actually filed, and then they will update your score on the next cycle. So it is something you can do, but if there is a mistake or something is not correct, they won't just take your word for it. It has to be reflected on the publicly disclosed document. So do put in place policies and procedures to carefully review that 990 and make sure that it accurately reflects all of the things that you have in place to maximize your score. And as I mentioned, if there are things that are not in place, you're not distributing the 990 to the board, you don't have conflict of interest policy, you're not taking minutes, all of those things, again, best practices, you really should be doing them. And these are the list of things that you can have to say to your board or say to your executive team, hey, we really should put these policies in place, adopt these before the end of the year so that we can answer yes on the 990. Another thing to do with the adaptability, the finance, particularly the finance beacon, that's that program expense ratio, your liquidity ratio or working capital ratio, excuse me, and the fundraising. Those are things that are good metrics to just be monitoring internally and advising your board and your executive team. Pay attention to what those numbers are. Sometimes they are what they are, and there's minimal ability for you to affect that. But to set a goal of, hey, we'd really love to have 3 months of operating working capital, or we'd really love to reduce our fundraising percentage, so we need to find ways to be more effective in our fundraising. Those are kind of long-term goals, and they indicate the overall health and the effectiveness of your organization. Also, look at the portal. Pay attention to that. Set a time to review it periodically and make sure that any updates that you have in your organization are reflected there, and that anything that you've entered has been reflected in your score. And as I mentioned previously, activate all the beacons. If you do all 4, even if you aren't fully able to complete 100% of every one, having those beacons activated automatically will affect your score. So let's talk about that 990. So this is page 6 of that full form 990. It's part 6, page 6. And this is a big chunk of where a lot of that data comes from. So I've highlighted a couple of areas: that number of voting members, 1A and B, and the number of voting members who are independent. This is where they're going to get that. Do you have 3 board members? Do you have 6 board members? And how many of them are independent? So make sure that these numbers are correct. I've seen a lot of organizations that will put the total number of board members and then put 0 for independent, and that's usually not correct. It's possible, but a lot of times it's not correct. So do make sure that you understand what independence is and that these 2 numbers are correct, because that will affect your score. 8 is about minutes. Do you take minutes at your board meetings and with your committees that can act on behalf of the board? So again, best practice, you should always be taking board minutes. They should be saved in a portal or on your website or with your secretary and shared with the board, but we should be taking minutes to show we have good transparency and governance. Continuing, this is still part 6. This is the bottom of that same page. Section B, this is all about the policies that your organization has in place, and we've talked about these several times. 11A is first about, do you distribute the 990 to your board before it is filed? That should be yes, as I mentioned. Their names are on it. They should understand it. They should know what it says. And then 12, ABC, and 13 and 14, these are those 3 major policies: conflict of interest, whistleblower, and document retention. So real easy to get those policies implemented, approved by the board, and you can answer those questions yes and get some easy points. The bottom of part 6 is about how you disclose things to the public, and your 990, as I mentioned, is legally required to be made available to the public. An easy way to do that and get some extra points is to just go ahead and put it on your website. And so if you're over $50 million, they will actually go and check and make sure it's there. Under that, you just self-report and say, yes, we put it on our website. It's not required to be on your website as long as you make it available just on request, but this is, again, low-hanging fruit, easy ways to get a few points. This is part 9. It's the statement of functional expenses. It's on page 10 of the 990. Hopefully this is familiar to you. This is going to be your program expense ratio, where you total the amount at the bottom of column B and divide that by the total and the amount on column A. Now, if you are over that $2 million or you're getting a review or an audit, this discussion should happen a long time before you even think about your 990, because how you allocate expenses between those categories should be an overall operational decision that you're making throughout the year. The IRS says whatever reasonable methodology you want to use that accurately reflects where these expenses belong is allowable as long as you're consistent. Our advice is document that methodology and apply it consistently and review it probably on an annual basis. There are different ways to allocate things like payroll. You can use FTEs for allocating rent, where your employees are, full-time employees, where they are located. Things like rent and utilities can be treated the same. You can be using actual timesheet entries for employees to allocate salary, or you can just take an estimate at the end of the year and say, okay, roughly 50% was program, 25% was management general, and 25% was fundraising. So you should be looking at all of these categories, come up with a methodology that makes sense based on the operations of your organization, and then at the end of the year, you should be able to generate a statement of functional expenses that reflects that. If you do it as you go, you have the ability to look at that ratio every month or every quarter or whenever you review your financial statements and say, okay, our program expense ratio is 65%. Is there anything that really should be allocated to programs? Should we really be reallocating resources to programs and away from management in general? What can we do to affect that number? Now, I'm going to say this multiple times for the rest of the presentation. What is right for your organization should be right for your organization regardless of its impact on the Charity Navigator score. You should not be using, oh, we want to get to 70%, so we're just going to move these expenses over. You need to be telling the truth. You can't be submitting a fraudulent 990 just to get the percentage that you need. But there may be situations where it is right for your organization to have a low program expense ratio. Perfect example of this comes up a lot with capital campaigns. and multi-year grants. You're going to have years where you're going to have huge amounts of revenue, and then you're going to spend down that revenue. So you may not have a lot of management in general those years, and that'll be high program expense. But to do that capital campaign, you're going to have a huge fundraising push. So your ratio is going to go down on the program side and high on the fundraising side. And so that makes sense. That's the right choice for the organization, for the long-term health, for the goals of the organization. And it may not reflect these targets that are objective targets, but you still need to drive your organization based on what is best for its overall health, longevity, and goals, and not just on the scores. If there is some leeway or you would like to increase those scores and you have the ability to make those adjustments, that's something that you can put into your budgeting and your planning, but it should not drive the overall decision for the organization. Okay, so here are some examples of those finance metrics, and these should look familiar. These are the ratings in the middle, and I've given kind of an example organization here. So let's say we have an organization with program expenses of 6.4 million and total expenses of 10 million. So they're at 64%. So they would be getting 16 points out of a total 25. If they can either reallocate or adjust operations so that they move 300,000 of their total expenses into programs, then they've increased their ratio by 3%, and that's equivalent to a 4-point bump. So these are just examples of ways that you can see what your organization is doing and do the math to kind of figure out what would be the effect on our Charity Navigator score if we made these adjustments. I've given full points to the organization here, example organization for liabilities to assets and fundraising efficiency, but another example below is the working capital. So if you have roughly, in this case, they've got 2.5 months of working capital. If they can fundraise or shift assets so that they end up with another $500,000 of capital, that's an additional month, and that's another 4 points. So we can increase the score of this organization by 8 points with some minor adjustments to operations. Again, this is if these are options to your organization as you're determining what your budget is. But if you have needs of your organization that need to be met with some different allocation, then you should prioritize those over the Charity Navigator score. We have in the past had clients where they were audit clients and compliance clients, and they were very concerned about their Charity Navigator score, and they were suggesting that they make certain adjustments based on the target of that goal. And we had to share with them, no, the reality is what the reality is, and we need to apply that. You can use this for future planning, but we cannot use that as the deciding factor for how things are presented on the 990 or how they're presented on your audited financial statements. So you are still governed by the law of the land, by GAAP financial statements and the IRS code, but you can use that for planning and you can use it for measuring the health of your organization. So real quick, before we wrap up, I wanted to give you kind of a little visibility to what the portal looks like. So if you do log in and you get connected to your organization, you will have your rating, and then you'll have the different beacons, how you access them. So this is what it looks like when you're already connected to your charity. And I mentioned that impact report builder right here. So it's a pilot program. So if you want to complete it and you qualify, you can do that here. But you would just click on view details or get started to complete the surveys. And with accountability and finance, again, there's not a lot you can do with that if your 990 has been filed, but if you do need to submit an amended 990, this is where you would do that. And I mentioned I would show this to you all. This is the rating release schedule for 2026. So as I mentioned, today is the first update of the year. So if you decide as a result of this training that you want to go in and complete some beacons and surveys and get some information updated, then you'll want to do that by May 11th. So right before the 990 is due, and that will allow your score to be updated by June 2nd. So that's how quickly it will apply. As I mentioned, these due dates don't apply to the 990 because it takes a while for that data to come through from the IRS. So the sooner you file that 990, the sooner the scores will come through, but it won't be updated until they get it directly from the IRS. In addition, the website, the portal, Charity Navigator has a lot of really great resources. So I put, again, we're sending these slides out to you. I put our website, which we have We'll have these slides and we'll have links to the website or to the video. But these are some links to some really great tools that Charity Navigator themselves provides. I have their main page, and then their rating methodology guide is like 115 pages long, and it goes through everything that I just went through, but in even more detail. And then they have a portal with resources and blogs and all kinds of things. So they're a really good resource. And I think everybody should at least be aware what their score is, and you should go check it out. So that is all I have. Any more questions pop up, Stacy?
Nope, you've covered all of the questions. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for your detailed and thorough explanations. I think maybe just kind of one overarching takeaway here, if you want to kind of bring it home in our last few minutes, maybe just reiterating again that Charity Navigator does not set GAAP nor Internal Revenue Code, and you framed it really well a few minutes ago. But if you want to kind of just close out with that, that would probably be perfect.
Yeah, so we are always happy to guide you guys on best practices and what is allowed and appropriate for the organization. And being involved in a nonprofit, we get to weigh all kinds of inputs when we're determining how we record things and what choices we make and what's best for the organization. And so while Charity Navigator is an excellent tool for marketing, and if we have the ability to impact that score, it absolutely is something we should consider, because that's a client, a donor facing portal. It's a tool that we can use to advertise how wonderful we are once we've accomplished those things. But the first thing is make sure you have a well-run organization with good internal controls that allows you to operate efficiently, and that will be reflected through Charity Navigator. And we will always tell you, this is what the law is, this is how it should be recorded. There is often gray area in there, and where there is gray area, we will allow you to determine what makes the most sense for your organization. But we strongly encourage you to understand what the limitations are. You need to follow GAAP, you need to follow the IRS code, and present what's accurate. So really, I see it more of a planning tool for future years. Once the year's closed, it is what it is. And there's always interpretation, but we want to make sure that we're being somewhat conservative and representing the accurate presentation of the organization, and then using those items as benchmarks to set goals for the future.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you all joining us today. Tomorrow, you should be getting a follow-up email with a link to a survey, which we would love if you would take a couple of minutes to respond to let us know how we did. And if there are any other topics that you are interested in hearing from us, we love educating our clients and our friends of the nonprofit industry, and want to be able to provide more events like this to keep you guys educated and up to date on what's going on. So thank you all, and have a good rest of your day.